Okay, now we're going to be moving forward to the next section of the day, which is a recording from incredible practitioner and very experienced midwife, Shafiah Monroe, who sadly cannot be joining us today. She has pre-recorded this session and given express permission for us to be able to use it. It is in the context of at the beginning of the pandemic around, and so there's reference to COVID-19 within it. But we hope this will be really informative and relevant to our work as she's talking about breastfeeding and domestic violence. So I'll pass over to Kamal.
And welcome to the Wednesday weekly chat with Shafiah Monroe. And I am representing episode, I believe, number 74. So 74 chats have been happening. And Shafiah Monroe Consulting, Birth and Change, hosts this weekly chat time with birth workers, meeting midwives, doctors, doulas, childbirth educators, lactation consultants, and anyone who is interested in coming together to cover a topic. So I always say with pride that this is the best place to come for evidence-based information, for cultural competent information, to be on the cutting edge of what's happening today in the now, so that you can impact your family, your community, and build your business. I have been doing this work now for over 35 years, and I will continue, I believe, because I love it. I love teaching and researching and seeing families really thrive and blossom, and seeing you as the midwife, birth worker, doula, however you define yourself, where you help families bring forth new life. I'm just excited that you're doing the work, and I'm excited to be able to offer services that will allow you to be your best professional self in the work. With that said, thank you all for coming on this morning, taking the time. I know right now in our country and across the world, there's a lot of stress going on. So I want to remind you to do self-care. I did post something on Shafiah Monroe Consulting on the guidelines for SMC full circle doulas, but those guidelines can work for anyone. The basis: keep washing our hands for 20 minutes up to the forearm, you know, eating high quality foods and vitamin C foods, getting lozenges, doing the 6 feet away. And my motto is, it's not about you, it's about everybody. Stay home. And just to know that each state is very confusing. Some states allow 25 people. Some states are doing a shutdown, stay in your shelter for 2 weeks. I'm encouraging all SMC full circle doulas to go to CDC or PubMed or National Institute of Health to really get the national information, because if you're traveling such as I do, and as a lot of you are doing, or just going from state to state, the information is confusing. So get a baseline, and I would say use that baseline from CDC. So thank you all. So with that said, today we have a very important conversation: breastfeeding and domestic violence. And I brought up that topic because over the years I have seen women who have been breastfeeding, and I've gone back for a visit, and one mom had a black eye. I find other mothers who there's a lot of stress in the house. I visit one mom before, it was on day 3, and she had a pump out. And I'm saying, why are you pumping so soon? Well, you know, so-and-so, my partner, he wants to be able to feed the baby. Just met with somebody else, similar situation. The father is yelling at her that she's being lazy, she should be pumping, and he could feed the baby while she goes back to work or does the dishes. And so there's a lot of undercurrent happening with breastfeeding and domestic violence. And often we don't have a conversation on that. We hear more about domestic violence during pregnancy or just in general domestic violence, but not happening around the breastfeeding issue. So I don't think I have to convince you all about why it's so important that we look at this topic. We are looking at women in this country of all races having a really low breastfeeding success rate compared to other parts of the world. So we might initiate early on the birth bed, but then by 6 weeks we have stopped, particularly Black women, and then for white American women, also lower breastfeeding rates. So as a whole for the country, our breastfeeding rates compared to the so-called, I won't say developed, let's say compared to Northern Europe countries, and even parts of Africa, of course, women here are not breastfeeding for a long time. When we make those those prenatal visits, we often talk about domestic violence warning signs through intimate partner, IPV, so intimate partner violence. But we often don't talk about domestic violence after the baby's born to find out why the mother is not breastfeeding. Sometimes the mom is going to be shy. She's not going to say because of the turmoil in her home. Unless you are a person who's been making home visits for the family consistently because you do a lot of postpartum doula work, or you were seeing her as a full circle doula, meaning you're making the nonstop care, you're her labor doula and her postpartum doula, you have a relationship with the family, and you can observe, like I did. The client was my full circle doula client, so I saw her from the beginning and met her partner to the end. I saw there was tension in the home because I had been involved enough to realize it. So even if your client is coming to you to a outside of a home clinical visit, she's meeting you at your center, at your office, to talk about breastfeeding issue because the baby's not latching on, or we hear about tongue tie, you also have to get the conversation going. How are things going at home? How is your partner feeling about you breastfeeding? And that might get the conversation going. How often do you have to pump? How often does, I'm going to say he or she, because a partner, same gender partners are also violent, as well as heterosexual partners. So the studies showing, unfortunately, it's more male to female violence, but we know there's female to female violence as well. And so I'm going to say the partner, how often is a partner wanting to feed the baby? Now, I want to just say that I think it's great that we have pushed over the years that the partner / the father should help out more, because historically, back in the 70s or the 80s, even the 90s, even today, it was pretty much the woman doing every single thing. So I know that we really pushed to have the father be more included. I'm going to use the term father here, the biological father, to be more included in the birth. As a result, we now see that a lot of fathers are staying at home while the mother works because she makes more money, and she is pumping, leaving milk for him to feed the baby. That's different. That's a willing agreement. But when the father / partner is saying that I want you to pump on day 3 or day 9 or even at 12 weeks so that I can feed the baby, that's a form of coercement, because the woman has the breast. Before there was bottles, unless someone, this story, sure, Egypt, other parts of the world, people would cut off use a piece of leather or get some type of fabric, plant fabric, and put milk or something in it, twist it up. But mainly they would use another woman to wet nurse. There was no bottles. If a mother died or did not make enough milk or had any kind of breastfeeding problems, that baby was given to a family member to continue nursing, or that baby parents hired a female who was a wet nurse. Her job solely was to feed that baby. So fathers really did not have the history of feeding the baby. It was a woman's position because of the physiology and the biology that women have the hormones in the breast to feed. So now we have a new thing. We have bottles now and pumps. And so a lot of men have taken that a little further. So some of the reasons why we find that the breastfeeding is increasing domestic violence is because a lot of the fathers are actually jealous of the mother-baby relationship. And so these are things we want to talk about when you're doing prenatal visits with your client or childbirth classes, that fathers don't have to feel jealous. The baby loves at first I want to say there's no excuse for domestic violence, okay? So I just want to make sure I'm not making excuses that we told him this, he probably would stop, because we know that domestic violence really is about power. It's nothing to do with you did anything wrong. But if there's some way that we can educate from the beginning that, your role, father, a partner, so hold the baby, bathe the baby, bringing the mom water is a form of love for the baby, and not feeling like it's a competition between you and the baby. And also realizing who owns the breast. Is it the father? Is the man's breast? Is the partner's breast? Does he own her body? Are those their breasts? Or is that her breast to do what she chooses with or when? We find that a lot of males in particular, and maybe female partners, we don't have the studies on that, are actually jealous of male babies nursing. They're jealous of seeing a male baby sucking the mother's breast, or they believe the mother is having sexual feelings because she's breastfeeding. And some mothers do have a feeling, and that's been documented. That's normal. That's still motherly. It's no big deal, and nobody knows how she's feeling but her anyways, unless she tells somebody. Also, men want women to get up and they feel like you're doing nothing. The woman's just sitting around and she is being lazy because, like, what are you doing? Why don't you cook? You know, why's the house clean? Whatever the situation might be. Well, I was breastfeeding. And so that's why I couldn't do what I did. Well, you should just be pumping and I could feed the baby or somebody else could feed the baby so you could do something. So that's a form of abuse, coercion, manipulation. The mother should not be told to pump unless she chooses to. The breast belongs to the mother and they are made for the baby. If the breast's been used for sexual fun or foreplay, that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. But when the mother says, hey, I don't want you to touch my breast, or I don't want to pump, I just want to breastfeed, that's her right. And nobody has the right to make her feel guilty or to hit her or to get aggressive with her or to take the baby from her or to call her names. So when those things are happening, what it's doing is deterring that mother from breastfeeding. So often we'll see that breastfeeding mother really getting worn down. She's like, is this too much argument going on? I'm just going to bottle feed. I've heard it so many times. He's always upset with me. I'm just tired. I'm just going to bottle feed. I'm just going to pump. I'm just going to do formula. You know, I give up. And so we get our clients coming back to our centers who are now bottle feeding because they want the father or the male partner or the female partners put so much pressure on them that they can no longer continue to breastfeed. So that's going to affect the mother's self-esteem. She felt like she failed. She wanted to breastfeed and she couldn't carry it through because of the internal pressure of her family, her intimate partner, you know, giving her pressure. It also means that her health is compromised. We know that women who breastfeed have less ovarian cancer, less breast cancer. They are going to get their iron levels back up again because they're not having their periods. There's so many benefits for the mother as well, reducing osteoporosis, delaying gestational diabetes by 10 years. If you breastfeed, there's so many medical things, as well as the baby being ill, getting antibodies from the mother's milk to be well. During right now, I mean, whether it's coronavirus or not, we always want moms to breastfeed because her body's going to make those antibodies. The baby's more prone to being sick. So when we have this situation where breastfeeding is increasing or is related to domestic violence, where the woman has to give up, the mother and the baby suffer. And so we have to find a way to address this. So I'm going to just stop and acknowledge everybody on and see if there's any questions. And I did put a link up that you could read later. So thank you, Jasmine, for joining. Jaceline, Chloe, Alicia, thank you. Good morning to you too, Queen. Amacia, and I said Jasmine, Kizzy, Katrina, Jackie, and Latasia, Paige, and Cheveria. Lactation doula, right on. So if anyone has any experiences with this, but I think we have been teaching over the years that, oh, pump your breast and let the father breastfeed. You know, give up that, don't worry about the night feeding, pump your breast and let the dad breastfeed. There's nothing wrong with that if that is a mother's choice. But if we make it like it's a trend, I always talk about cultural competency. I always talk about the American movement of how we breastfeed, how we do everything is not really led by Black women. It's not really led by women of color. It's led by the white mainstream culture. So we're hearing all of a sudden, and in fact, some men don't want to feed the baby with the bottle. And so that causes the argument. You know, well, I pump, you need to feed the baby so I can go shopping, or I can go out. Again, if that's a family value and mothers need a break, there's nothing wrong with that. But when it becomes force on the male side or the partner side, where he's forcing the woman to do it, then it becomes domestic violence, where the mother has a black eye or she's having emotional abuse because there's so much a downgrading of the mom. So you want to talk about these things in your practice early about the feeding practices. So to the partner, you know, how do you feel about, you know, Marissa breastfeeding? What have you all arranged in terms of supplementing the feeding, or what have you all agreed upon night feeding? Which your feelings about the baby breastfeeding past 6 weeks. That's the other issue. When babies are breastfeeding past 3 months, again, a lot of in the home negativity, that baby's too old, that baby's too big, that baby's having a good time, want you to stop breastfeeding. And so again, mothers being coerced and pressured into doing what they don't want to do because the partner is dictating to them. And so as a birth worker, our goal, or my goal, is to explain to you what I believe is that our goal is to empower the mother. Those are her breasts, and you know, at the end of the day, that's my baby. So they say mama's mama's baby, daddy's baby. Okay, a little joke, but for sure it's her baby. And that's another thing too. I'm glad I brought that up. A lot of fathers say at some point, "Is that my baby?" So they use that for an excuse. There's all these excuses they find to be violent, and domestic violence can be sexual. It can be physical, it can be emotional, it can be economical, holding money back from the partner. Well, if you're gonna keep breastfeeding, I'm gonna take the car. If you're gonna keep breastfeeding, you know, I'm not gonna pay the bill, you pay the bill. So it's not just one type of domestic violence, it comes in all arrays. And so when you see a client coming to you looking disheveled, emotionally exhausted, because I always say that, you know, having a baby and breastfeeding should not make the person look broke down. Okay, she should not be exhausted. There is, and she just says that I'm not getting enough sleep. That might be the time for you to ask, okay, what else is going on, you know, in your home? Now that you know her enough, you know, using cultural competency, using health literacy, you know, how did you sleep last night? Again, how's your mate and you all doing? How's he handling you breastfeeding? Is he supporting it? Did he support it prior? If you find in a relationship when you're talking to your client that her mate was never really supportive breastfeeding, really never was, really didn't believe, doesn't like it, you're going to look deeper to see if there's more problems that are going to be happening. So then you want to figure out how you can support the mother in creating a safety plan. We're not saying that the, I mean, the mother might have to leave the situation, but you want to ask, you know, how does she want to handle it? If you are a mandatory reporter and your client comes in, her breast is bruised, you know, someone punched in the breast, squeezed her breast, hurt her breast, and it wasn't the baby, or she has a black eye or scratches or bruises of any type, you have to let her know when you first start your service that you are a mandatory reporter. So she'll know that if she's in danger, that you have to tell somebody. So let her know that. Also, you can ask her, does she have someplace that she can stay, that she can feel safe at? Does she need help getting there? It's important that if you do go with her to the lactation consultant meeting or her meetings after with the midwife or her OB, it's important that she has support each time as she chooses, as much as possible that she see the same provider each time, the same lactation consultant, the same OB or midwife, whoever the health provider is, because it takes time for a mother to open up and trust, especially if it's not of her same race. There's already a lot of mistrust going on. So it's important that the healthcare provider be consistent and ask the right question and then give resources. We're told that the provider will say, okay, are you safe? No, I'm not. Well, okay, they don't even know how to handle it. So make sure the provider, he or she, knows how to handle it and ask the right kind of questions. Pumping is exhausting, by the way. For a lot of mothers, it's a lot of work to have to sit there and pump. So being forced to pump against your will can make your milk dry up. It can make your breast hurt. Trying to pump, when mothers say, I can't get any milk out, but the baby can, it may not be the best pump. So then they're saying, I'm trying to pump so that he or she can feed the baby and I'm not making any milk, so I'm a failure, as opposed to if she let the baby breastfeed and not pump, the baby very full. We would see those 5 to 6 diapers. I'm going to stop and see if there's any questions, because we are reaching our point. Latosha Rouse, is there a link between rape and breastfeeding difficulty? How do you help them? Good question, Latosha. I don't know if there's a link between that. We know that, you know, a lot of conversation says about trauma, sexual trauma. Women who are raped often cannot have a vaginal birth. They don't want the feeling. They're going to want an epidural. Even some request a cesarean section from that trauma of the vaginal area being violated often or even one time. And I'm told too that some mothers who have been molested as children don't feel good about their bodies and they don't want to breastfeed. So that would be more of a psychosocial support for that mom. But I'm sure there's a lot of literature out there. If you find it, be sure to share it in the Wednesday weekly chat group. That'd be great. And Roberta Eagle Horse Ortiz says, when he calls her nasty or sexual, exactly. You're being nasty. You just like what that baby's doing to you. You're weird. So those things are forms of domestic violence. So I just want to end by saying that we do want to learn how to ask our client those questions. How the breastfeeding's going, you know, how often do you pump? Do you want to pump that long? Why are you pumping that long? Who else is feeding the baby? How do you feel about that? How often is that person feeding that baby? If we want the mom to make milk, she needs to breastfeed her baby. Okay, that saliva, those little hands, that little mouth, the heat of the breast, all of that triggers the hormones to make milk in no comparison to a breast pump. So breast pumping is not breastfeeding. Breast pumping is putting human milk into a bottle. Breastfeeding means the baby is actually on the breast. And so for anyone to disrupt that from the mom is a violation of her human rights. And it's not okay. It's not acceptable. I mean, I just wanted to use a concept that I'm seeing more and more recently, men who are really hard on the woman for not pumping to allow them to breastfeed. So the whole movement of men being equal to women, they're not equal to us, you all. They're men, we're women. They don't have breasts. They're not designed to breastfeed. Sure, sometimes you can bottle feed your baby. But I just want to say, in other parts of the world, this is not an issue, by the way. This is an American problem. I have purposely interviewed as many African men as I could. Like, what? They're not interested in feeding that baby. To them, that's women's work. They want to feed the woman, give her food, give her gifts, watch her breastfeed, throw the baby in the air, rub the baby, laugh, kick, or read. But they're not trying to want to feed the baby. I'm not hearing that from men out of China. Islamically, I've talked to different men who are Muslim, like, no, that's never been a thought. So again, the American culture is a cultural issue. Now, domestic violence is worldwide, but the thing about men being told they have to feed the baby, over the years, coming from Lamaze, where men had to go into the room because the woman's mother could not, gave him the first right of he's in the room, and the mother's biological mother could not be in the room back in the day. Only the legal husband, not even the boyfriend, it had to be the legal husband only. And then we're getting into the breastfeeding and carrying the baby on the father's carrying the baby. And I already talked about that. Of course, if that baby weighs 30 pounds, you're carrying the front. There's no way that, I mean, your woman can do, but it's exhausting. Why would you do it when you got your husband with his pectoral chest and his shoulder? He's a man, his testosterone, that he can carry that way different because we're not backing our babies, or we're not putting our babies in a cradle board. So therefore, it's more difficult. So there's a lot of things we're seeing culturally that is shifting what mothers should be doing, not should, but have been doing, and some of them still want to do it. And so domestic violence is never acceptable no matter what the reason is. If she got two breasts, one breast, wants to breastfeed 2 years, 3 years in the bed, she wants to breastfeed publicly, you know, she's want to, well, hey, go get in the room. You know, I don't want you breastfeeding at the job. I don't want you breastfeeding at work. So you got to pump. So all this dictation of how she can use her body is a violation. It's not okay. Really, breastfeeding is the mother's business. It's everybody else's job to support her and not dictate how she breastfeeds her baby. She is connected best, and she knows. The partner, the father, has a very important role that they can do, but it's not touching her. It's not putting her down. It's not doing economic control. It's not doing sexual violence against her. It's not trying to humiliate her. All those are no-no. So we're going to continue to have this conversation with your clients. I would say you can Google any domestic violence hotline. There's a national domestic violence hotline. There's tons of slides on how you can train yourself to recognize domestic violence and be supportive to the client who is being abused, what resources are available, and that we ourselves don't judge her. We might say, oh, get out that house, that guy's, you know, that woman's whack. She doesn't want to leave. We can't call her names either. It takes time to get out of situations for various reasons. All the ones we talked about, fear, economic, self-esteem, all that plays in it. So as a birth worker, a doula, a midwife, our job is to support, empower, to give the resources, and give a non-judgment listening ear. If she can talk to you about it without you saying what she should be doing, sometimes that alone can get her to make the next step. And they say that a person leaves a domestic violence 3 times before they leave for good. So she might leave and come back again leave, come back again. If you find a shelter, make sure that shelter allows breastfeeding. It's supportive of breastfeeding mothers. That they have a clean place, that if she chooses the pump, there's a place to store her milk. Electricity, that she can bring her 3-year-old who might be a boy. So even finding a shelter that supports breastfeeding women nationally can be a challenge. So it is 11:25, you all, and I have enjoyed, of course, sharing information with you. Breastfeeding domestic violence is very real. We don't talk enough about it. But again, now be aware, look at your clients, look at the situation, and see why they might not be breastfeeding fully, exclusively, or in fact just weaning their baby. Linda joined, and Eliza. Well, I don't see any questions, you all, so thank you for coming on. Just stay tuned and keep doing your good work. Again, take care of yourself, stay in small groups. In Oregon, you can take a walk, but don't walk around people. If you have to go to the store, stay 6 feet away. When you come into your house, know that the virus can live on your clothes, the gas handle, your car key, so wipe things down in your home and things that you touch. And you can breastfeed if you have the coronavirus, and hopefully we'll be out of this soon. Again, check CDC. If you've not joined the e-newsletter, please do at www.shafiahmonroe.com. And I will see you all next Wednesday. If you need me, I am at Shafiah Monroe at shafiahmonroe.com. Peace, blessings, and love you all. Take care and keep doing the great work.
So that was a pre-recorded session. So unfortunately, Mama Shafiah is not here to field questions from us all, but I'm sure we all learned so much, such a vital presentation, as Yvonne has said, raising so many important points of the positions that we find ourselves in as those that are supporting breastfeeding, the things that we need to be considering, the context of what our role is, and the wider situations that people are in, and what we can be doing to better support mothers, and all the levels and layers of that domestic violence can be occurring and happening. We're coming up next will be Hannah Dennison, a GP, who's going to be speaking 101 on breastfeeding. But while Hannah gets ready to join, I didn't know if anybody had any comments or thoughts about listening to Shafiah's presentation, any learning points, the things that people are going to take away from that. It would be good to highlight what learning has gone on. In the comments I've got, so informative, that was really informative, really important issues. So yeah, is there any specifics that people took? Jennifer Stool has, that's the point that I was just looking at, I had down there. It really highlighted to me the importance of continuity of carer in all aspects of maternity care. I'd agree, Jennifer, that moving towards continuity of care, the better births agenda, as ever, this is such an important reason of relational building that can be so transformative for providing and for as a safety issue. I think it's really important that we consider it in those contexts. Natalie, thank you for your comment. I think the notion of highlighting this in antenatal conversations is interesting. We probably don't mention this enough, what the plan is for the partner. Really true, to be thinking about the sharing of roles and having a chance to really unpack what the breastfeeding experience can be like antenatally, absolutely. Natalie has also said, often difficult to unpick this issue postnatally when both people are tired and if any other feeding issues are happening. Very, very true. Much more intense time to be having those conversations. Thank you everyone for your comments. Trisha King, I like that she gave examples of how to start conversations to check in that someone is okay and well. Very true. I hope you all got notes on that as well, and how we can gently and tenderly support, but also not shy away from it and be direct in that. Jacqueline Fenner, I didn't realize pressure to pump was a common thing. Pressure to formula feed, but not pumping. Has anyone else come across this in the UK or USA? So that's a question for anybody to jump in on. And Yvonne Inch has said, we come across this so often, dads wanting to feed the baby, and we get an uneasy feeling how to answer and advise. So I'm going to invite Carmel on to speak to this issue around pumping.
Hi everyone. I wrote about it kind of recently, and I think I shared it briefly in last year's event, but it just really resonated with me. But at the time, I didn't see it as kind of abuse or domestic violence. It was just what it was. So with my older daughter, she's 11. It was well, we're not together anymore, so it was quite a toxic relationship. But at the time, he would their dad would, well, I found out 2 years later that he would throw away my breast milk. So I went back to work quite early, about 5 months, and I worked nights, and so I would pump my milk and have it available for her, but he would throw it away and give formula. And so when I found out, I think we might have stopped, or we were just coming up to ending breastfeeding. She was about probably 18 months. It was not even 2 years, 18 months later. And so but yeah, I was heartbroken. It was, I think, I was like, I remember saying, I would have rather you told me you cheated rather than throwing away my breast milk. It was so heartbreaking to know, and nothing I could do about it. And so when I had my second daughter, we were not together for sure at that point, and from day 3, there was the pressure to pump. It's like, well, okay, when are you going to start pumping? And just in the back of my mind, all I was thinking was, well, I don't want to start pumping because you might throw my milk away again. And so I really resisted it for a long time, but that pressure was there, and he wanted to be able to take her from 3 days old, which wasn't in my mind not going to happen. And so but it was a lot of pressure, and I just resisted it. That I didn't speak to anybody about it, or nobody asked about it. I just knew in my mind that I wasn't going to kind of give in to his pressure. And eventually, she might have been about 3 or 4 months, and he had to really convince me that he wasn't going to throw my milk away, which I don't know if he ever did, but and I will never know. He hasn't told me to date. And then and so we I did in the end pump, and he would have her for the days that he did, and all the time that he did, and I assume he would have hopefully given it to her. But it's who do you go to, and where do you go to get support? And I guess that question isn't asked antenatally, and I had continuity of care with home birth midwife for my second and the first as well. But again, these questions are not asked. They see that you're breastfeeding and assume it must be all going okay, baby's gaining weight. So I guess it really highlights that we need to ask these questions early on, and if their mother is pumping, finding out the reasons why. And I think if I look back at my children's dad's kind of background, he didn't grow up with a mother. She left when he was quite young, for kind of various reasons. And so I think as he grew up thinking he didn't need a mother, and that was, he used to say, we were young, we were 16, he was, and I remember my first daughter was born, he'd say, she doesn't need a mother, she doesn't need a mother. And it never really, you don't really think. In my mind was like, well, of course she does need a mother, of course. And what would happen to her? And he was like, well, the state would have them. And he had this really warped idea. And so I think you've got to look at the father's background, and where he's coming from, what his trauma is, because I think that then has a huge impact on how his relationship with the mother and his child. And for him, breastfeeding was just, it was taking me away from him, and he was no longer my priority in his mind. And so yeah, so that kind of, it creates that additional pressure, complexities. And I think where I did feel forced to stop breastfeeding with my first, she was 18 months, and he really wanted me to stop. I was living with him at the time, and I did stop, but he would go out to work at night, and I would feed her in secret because he wasn't there. And so I kind of prolonged the time before stopping. And so with my second, I was adamant I was going to wait until she weaned. And I still felt like I had to feed in secret because I had views of people from, you know, family members as well, that, well, you're still feeding her, you know, she doesn't need milk anymore. And then so as my daughter's got old, she was 4 when we stopped breastfeeding. And she has had some kind of issues like with anxiety and separation anxiety. And when I speak to her dad about it, it's like, oh, because you breastfed for too long. And so for him, the reason why, you know, she's too attached to me is because I breastfed. And so even now, still to this day, she's 8, that, you know, that, I guess, that pressure, or that made to feel guilty that I breastfed her for so long. And I kind of have found myself questioning, like, you know, is that the reason why she's had, you know, such difficulties? But, you know, I think it really resonated for me, Shafiah's talk, and I hope that, you know, we can always just start asking the questions, even you know, myself, and for the women that I see, and just really kind of just the subtle signs or the subtle cues that might be there. And I think asking how the father is feeling, how is he feeling towards breastfeeding, because I think then that may expose a few kind of red flags that we can then support the women further.
Thank you so much, Kamal. Big love to you for sharing your story, sharing so honestly, with so much for us all to learn from. And while Shafiah was speaking more generally, you touched all of our hearts with what you've gone through and what you've learned and what we can learn. So I'm really thankful for what you've said and what we can take forward, and considering where fathers and where partners are at in their thinking, how their trauma is playing out in the dynamics of the relationship, and how that's going to impact and affect breastfeeding. So thank you again. Deep breaths.